give a brief introduction to the team, and we'll get into the content. Hey everyone, I'm Andrea Gao. I'm a lead data scientist with BCG, and I am one of the founding members of Responsible AI at BCG, and I am in part of the team who built this open source Python package called ARTKIT earlier this year. And ARTKIT is used to automatically scale up and test your GenAI solution. And here today we want to share our experience with Responsible AI at BCG and demonstrate our ARTKIT library.
Yeah, well said. I mean, pretty much same, except my name is Kevin. I'm a senior data scientist at BCG. So also have some experience working with GenAI, specifically responsible AI. It's been obviously a very hot topic. So a lot of clients are very excited about it. They're wanting to build stuff, and I mean, the hard part is like testing, evaluating, like how do you build a sustainable product? So I think we're gonna talk a bit about that today.
Yeah, since we have a very private space today, guys, what's in your mind? What do you want to learn from this? Feel free to share your thoughts with us before we dictate the talk.
We can call it. That's
one thing. Oh, go ahead. No. One thing that sparkled in my eye is that I'm also a consultant, and it's a thing. It's also a pain to see people reluctant to put generative AI solutions into production. Could be redundant. Could be incomplete. So that's that kind of joy that you're having now is something I want to have too.
Yeah,
so,
that's very key topic. That's like
you need to rely on the solution, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's very important part of the reason we developed this package, and we'll definitely talk about that. Anyone else have a question?
One more. I have one more.
Okay, sure.
If you're are you dealing with like vendors models or just Hugging Face?
Both. Our package and the way we frame GenAI testing evaluation can work for both vendor and I would say proprietary or open source LLM or GenAI model.
Sure.
To answer your first question, I have a lot of experience with that. Since late 2022, ChatGPT became a really popular thing. I have been working on that. Before that, I did a bunch of NLP, computer vision work, but GenAI, ChatGPT was a game changer. Since then, I think BCG has worked on more than 100 different clients, which are mostly like Fortune 500 clients. They have a lot of resources and data and different opportunities for us to test potential use cases of GenAI and LLM on. I personally have focused on, I would say, customer service and agentic application of GenAI. And I spent a lot of time doing that since early 2023. But it was a pain for us to push beyond POC phase. We can always build a very good demo, good story, chatbot, or even a very beautiful application within the phase of POC. But go beyond that, it was really painful for us to convince our client this is something they should do. Even though they realize there's value inside it, there's a lot of hesitation from different stakeholders within the company or within stakeholders or from public. That's part of Responsible AI, which we started 4 years ago, because AI is so critical in our business and daily life. But how to deploy it responsibly is was not discussed before 5 years ago, before we start thinking about this. But for GenAI, it's a totally different level because of the, I would say, more unpredictability of this probabilistic model. And because of that, because we build a lot of POC model, and we find it extremely hard to convince people to deploy GenAI system to their daily operation, business daily operation. And we realized we have to test and evaluate things thoroughly. That's very critical path towards deployment.
Yeah.
Besides that, we will need to work through regulation, concern, etc., etc. But without proper testing, there's no way, it will be extremely difficult to convince people to use GenAI model. And some of the use cases I personally have worked on, for example, customer service or financial services, they are very sensitive towards data privacy, towards accuracy, towards predictability. And without doing fully pro testing, it's very hard to convince them. That's why we start doing testing and build up the way how we think about we should test GenAI model, and how do we actually test GenAI model, and how do we use packages that is available on internet to test GenAI model. I think there are existing players like LangChain or Llama Index, but after using them for a while, we just don't find them satisfying what we need.
There's only so much they can do.
Yeah,
right?
that's why we start thinking about what is the framework we need, and how do we build a package that serves for our needs. And that's where we start building ARTKIT, which will help us automatically build a pipeline for you to evaluate your GenAI model, plus scale up your test evaluation, and also help you orchestrate the process. But just one thing I really want to highlight is, even though we're saying ARTKIT is to help you automatically scale up and test your GenAI model, it has to involve human in the loop to curate a good golden data set, or to define what is label 0, what is label 1, and what is good for your business case. Without that, we will just create a bunch of, I don't know, gibberish stuff from GenAI itself, and that's critical in this process.
Okay, to follow up on that, because you said the magic words that I've been worrying about. If you're in a relatively small organisation doing that, we're 300, right? How do you get the resources to get the client to curate their data collections?
You have
we've done this a couple times, and yeah, you're gonna need to sit down with the subject matter expert, and it's gonna take some time. I think what I've learned from doing this a few different times is you need to know going in, like, what you want to get from them. So like when we first tried to do this, it was just kind of like, okay, come up with some cool Q&A pairs to figure out if your chatbot's working, right? We wrote down like 20 of them, and then we realized that the way we had written the answers was at like a completely different level of detail than the chatbot was responding. And so we kind of then needed to go back and rewrite everything. So doing this now, it's like really important to go into it saying like, what actually are we testing? What are the specific risks inherent to this system? And how do I expect this application to work? So it's not maybe so much on like, we can't take out the human altogether, but we need to be like smart and targeted going in so we're not wasting people's time. I would also add, you can supplement the human-generated Q&A pairs with an LLM. You just have to be treating those results differently. Like you can have your one like golden data set is what you'd call it for the human-generated testing pairs. You might have like a silver data set that you either augmented from the human pairs or you generated based on your source documents.
Does that answer your question?
Some of it, I'll give you one use case I've got. We have been transcribing all our customer service calls for the last 7 years, so I have a pretty huge data set. To test an AI evaluating either summarization or categorization of those calls, or even doing a evaluation of how well the agent handled the call, I borrowed a trick that Anthropic put out, which is I asked it to find a quote from one or more quotes from the thing, and then give its reasons. And then when I got tell me what the quotes were. Then what I did was I fed that back in with just a straight string search to check that it had pulled the quote out of the transcript correctly. That's a very big confidence booster. So effectively, you're using the thing to self-test itself. Self-test. That works. And also, it's a big booster for the business because they can actually understand that. If you give them the reason, the quote, you can show them that the quote was found in the transcript, right? They will believe the output, and it's difficult to question at that point.
Yeah, I do like this. Like I like the evaluators that kind of describe their reasoning.
Yeah.
And I think what you're saying with like when they talk to each other, we see this a lot. Like we've used this. I know DeepEval is another package that does a lot of this, where you're really breaking your metrics into small granular chunks.
Yeah.
And then you're asking a lot of like validation questions, you're passing it off to different LLMs. So I think breaking the problem down does make these things perform better.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems folks are more interested in GenAI evaluation instead of broader responsible AI initiative. I'm going to show this page to you all to describe how we think about overall GenAI evaluation cycle and processes. The way we think about it is basically similar to any software development cycle. It should be a full loop from mapping your concern to measure your concern and mitigate the concern, and then rethink about the process over and over again throughout your software development cycle. Which means when you start thinking about application or develop application, you should proactively think about what are the potential risks for your application, which is associated with AI or GenAI, and map out those potential risks from different dimensions. It could be like legal risk, which you are touching some regulated area, or it could be toxicity, which you don't want a bad experience for your customer, or it could be like harmful behavior to your employee or customer. Thinking about this actively, otherwise, and define it. Otherwise, when you start doing evaluation, you could go all over the place. We recommend having a list of things before, while you start thinking about a project or while you're developing a project, and stick with these principles. And secondly, build up some measurement. Define what measurement you want, and build up golden data set or reference data that can help you achieve those measurements. For example, it could be classification label, or it could be golden Q&A data set, or it could be, what else? Golden summary, actually golden summary reference data.
One that we haven't, like bias is like kind of an important one that's like inherent to all of these systems. And if you have a client-facing chatbot, like I think that's a really tricky one that could come back to like bite you. Like if somebody finds bias in your chatbot. So all of these are going to have different ways to measure them. And that's exactly to your point. That's why you need to think about beforehand. Like,
yeah, I would say that gets back to the mapping part, because a lot of application we've seen from our clients, especially our clients at Fortune 500 company, they are very reluctant to deploy GenAI system to their customers. For example, for a financial institution, it's very hard for them to deploy it to their credit card services. It's more so they are more open to deploy it to their employees, for example, to help their employee to answer benefit question or like holiday question, etc., etc. Those like different use cases will have different risk level when you do the mapping. And for customer-facing chatbot or system, it will be very different from internal employee-facing system, and that will impact how you decide your measure and your testing framework too.
Yeah, in our case, it's the same. We're HIPAA regulated, and we will not deploy customer facing. There's currently policy, and it's not likely to change in the next, I think, couple of years at least. But we do want to move aggressively using them as assist tools for the customer facing agents. And one of the most difficult things for us is actually getting the business people to come out with metrics. So I'll give you a use case which is really manual. I used the questionnaire for the agents to evaluate how well they performed on the calls, the supervisors for them. I took that questionnaire, adapted it slightly so it would work well with an LLM, and I've run that on several thousand calls. Now I get a nice distribution of scores, but when the supervisors do it, admittedly on a much smaller sample of calls, almost every course scores 100% and nobody believes it. So the other thing is, sometimes there just is no gold standard. You have to build the gold standard from what the model's doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's very critical across GenAI case and non-GenAI case. How do you make the existing business or user to adopt to the new ways of living, ways of working? It's beyond GenAI. And I think that leads to our second point on measurement too. It's very critical to work with whoever is the end user or whatever that links to your business goal to define the right measurement and ways of measure things for GenAI. And I think that also goes beyond GenAI metrics, including toxicity or accuracy or relevance, etc., etc. In my experience, most GenAI applications are used to improve the efficiency of your operation. Considering that into your measurement is very important. For example, what's the uplift rate lift after you deploy the GenAI assistant to your system? That's very important. Without thinking about the business value, it's very hard to convince business to continue using the system you're developing, even though it's not super technical or extremely related to GenAI itself.
Yeah, I have another question. So what you just said is maybe more business-centric kind of metric, rather than something technical like F1 measure if you're doing classification, or even say with named entity extraction, you need to somehow evaluate completeness. But those are more technical metrics that stakeholders could care less, right? And in the end, you have to translate that to them. You have to show the value of your solution to them. So do you see that it goes more towards business metrics in the end? Because I like what you said before about not replacing people in processes. So maybe a positive externality of augmenting their productivity would be sticking to their KPIs, for example. And since we're augmenting their delivery capacity, those KPIs we would expect that it goes up, right? Because you're being more productive thanks to the solution, right? So do you see it more going towards business metrics, or does ARTKIT offers some range of solutions towards technical metrics?
I think ARTKIT offers a framework to help you achieve both technical metrics and business metrics, but it leans more towards the technical metrics. And the way I think about technical metrics and business metrics is you have to achieve some basic technical metrics to make people comfortable with even thinking of
what people comfortable with technical
both technical people and business people. For example, you have to make sure that the predictability, for some use cases, the predictability, reproducibility is ensured. And you have to make sure that there's zero toxicity sometimes. And you have to make sure that use technical metrics to convince both technical side and business side. Only after that, you can go to the business side. Okay, we also measure uplift or efficiency improvement, and come and say, okay, beyond it's safe and also it brings you business value. And then we can talk about deployment.
Yeah, I guess one add-on there is I like the idea of the technical being like the baseline. I somewhat lost my train of thought there, so I'll say, agreed. You need to hit the base performance and know it's working well. But even if you're running all these tests, right, there's always a risk-reward trade-off. You're not going to be building a chatbot, RAG app, whatever, that has 100% accuracy. That's impossible. If you wanted that, you should not be using a probabilistic model. So knowing what is your actual accuracy, and then weighing it against a reward, which is 20% faster response rate, then you can actually be in a position to make a go, no-go decision, should I launch this app or not?
Yeah. And business needs some education too. I've heard clients, they told me, oh no, this has to be certain. Just the agent's answer has to be certain. And I was like, then maybe you should not use GenAI because there's no certainty. But a lot of people don't know that because this is a probabilistic model, and there's always some randomness when you deploy it.
Business users don't understand that.
Yeah. And let's get back to the chart here. After we define the measurement, we should do comprehensive red teaming, which I think it includes human testing and human plus ARTKIT automated testing, and potentially plus future like automated testing. We believe only like human testing is more deep, curated, and comprehensive. If you have a diverse and expert view on what you should test and what is important for your use case. But human plus ARTKIT test can help you cover more testing and can do it fastly, efficiently. And when you deploy your model, deploy your system, it's better to have some automated testing like regression, like I would say data deployment. It's good to have some like baseline safeguard testing. And we believe that a hybrid approach regarding comprehensive testing is the right way to for GenAI testing. And lastly, through our testing, if we identify any risk area or things we need to make mitigation on, we'll mitigate it. Trying to change prompt or change the way you process data, or adding another agent or guardrail to make sure that the system's behavior align with your risk tolerance level, and the measurement from coming out from your test is within your design. And then we will revisit the mapping and measurement and testing again and again throughout the life cycle of your system.
Yeah, I think one specific example, I think on the human plus like machine testing that I remember we did is like the humans can be like super targeted, and especially if you have people who've worked with the app, like they know what to ask that's potentially going to break it, and you can use that as like maybe your upper end on like how challenging should these tests be for your app. But using automated testing, they're never going to be like as powerful of attacks, but just the scale of it gives you a good idea of the stability of performance of the app. So like one example, we had an app that you ask it to speak in another language, it can start to do weird things. You can pass system prompt barriers. So we had some users who were doing like prompts in other languages. They do like 5 or 6. They say, okay, it never responds in any language but English. It's good. But then we do this, and we generate like 1,000 tests in all sorts of languages, and we realize like, okay, actually it's more like 5% of the time it's going to respond in non-English language, and that's a risk because it means it could go around the system prompt. But at least we've been able to measure it, right? So now we have a better idea of like what risks are out there, and if people are using this thousands and thousands of times, what could be exposed.
Last step, I think Kevin is a good point for us to pivot to our notebook and to show how we're actually using ARTKIT to do that.
Yeah, let me find this. This one. So I'll start at the top. Like we've been talking kind of just based on our practical experience, what we've learned, but like you said, ARTKIT, the idea behind building this was to help you speed up the development and automation of your testing suite. It's very flexible, it's very open-ended, and like Andrea said, it's not a magic button. It's a framework for you to write your tests and scale your tests. But it doesn't supplement all like the thinking about what the risks are. So this notebook's like just high level, like open the repo, how would you do this? I'll try to get into like more specifics on how this is used in practice as we go. Let's scroll past those.
Can you zoom in a little bit, please?
Yeah.
Or maybe I should have been sitting there. Oh, thanks.
It's kind of just a wall of text. So I'll just summarize this part. So ARTKIT, the library, is built around two main types of objects. You have model connector objects and pipeline objects, right? Very simple, but they're very powerful, very flexible, and they let us abstract away a lot of the background work we otherwise would need to, rewrite every single time we want to build a new testing suite for our apps. So the model connector objects are ARTKIT wrappers around different LLM providers, and we can also connect to custom LLMs, for example, Hugging Face, HTTP endpoints, however you've defined your system. So I think three big things that I like about using the ARTKIT connector wrappers versus just the provider wrappers. Everything's natively asynchronous, so you don't, when you're running your tests, you're running 100 different tests, you don't need to worry about managing all the different API calls and coordinating, collecting the different responses. This is all kind of abstracted away for you. It happens automatically in the pipeline. We don't care about that. It happens automatically in the pipeline, and all your results are gathered and showed you at the end. Right? So that's very nice to get up and running quickly. Second, a very handy caching feature with all these model connectors. So everything's written to SQLite databases every time you make a call to the API. This has been very helpful when you're debugging or developing your tests. You don't need to make repeated calls, just waste time and money. Also I think useful here, putting everything in a common class framework means you can talk to different models using the same language, right? So everything can be wrapped in the same caching function. Everything's managed via the same async managers. You don't need to worry about juggling multiple processes or multiple caches or anything like this. So again, maybe a lot of this sounds simple, but it's abstracting away a lot of this annoying backend stuff that if you just have a couple data scientists who are trying to build something quickly, this is work people have already done, and they don't necessarily need to redo this every time they want to start writing their tests. And here's the code. So it's pretty simple. In this case, it's an OpenAI chat model. We initialize a model connection, and in this case, we're using a cached wrapper. It's going to write everything to this database. Okay, so that was the model connectors. The other, and I think this is very useful, the pipeline objects. So this is essentially an orchestrator for your tests. So we've made all these asynchronous calls. I need to gather up the responses, format the responses, figure out who I'm sending the call to, how I've modified it, what the returns are. It's again, just a lot of this background orchestration that's annoying to build yourself every time you're trying to test a new system. So really quickly out of the box, right, in just a few lines of code, you can start writing, and I'll scroll to a complete example. You can start writing pipelines that are going to take some variable inputs, modify them in some way, send them to your target system, get responses from that target system. You can then send those off to another evaluator, right? Aggregate all the responses. So we'll build up to there in this example, but just to quickly read through what we're doing here, we have an ARTKIT step object, which is going to take some dictionary of parameters or inputs, and that's that async generator at the top there. So this is just saying our step is making a call to GPT-4 where we're calling the get response function from this chat model and yielding a response. And so then if I want to run this pipeline, it's just this line right here where I say, okay, run this step with this input question, right? And then you can print out the response. So let's go scale this up, right? This is simple example, but we'll show a minimum end-to-end example of how I can test a simple chatbot. So in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to take a collection of input prompts. We're going to modulate them in different ways. We're going to send those to a chatbot and then evaluate it for, in this case, we're evaluating the chatbot's response for sarcasm. So the practical use case here is you've generated some set of input challenges, maybe manually plus some LLM. You don't have a huge number of them, but you can augment these. You can generate a much greater number of challenges with this LLM, right? That's what these branching arrows mean. We've taken one prompt, we've rephrased it in multiple ways. We're then going to send all of those different challenges to our system and evaluate it. So let's scroll down to see how the code looks for that. I think it's at the bottom. I'll read through it in a little more detail than this. So this part I think is quite useful. Here we're setting up a pipeline, and we've connected to an LLM that we've prompted to modulate the tone of an input question. So in this case, this parallel function is very handy because we're going to take a single input prompt, right? We're going to send it to this rephrase tone function in parallel 3 different times with 3 different arguments. Those are all going to make asynchronous calls to the chat LLM. It's going to return the rephrased question to us, and then it's going to pass that right off to the next step. So if you were doing this like really quickly and you were just trying to write it yourself, you might need to, you might make 3 separate API calls, wait for all the responses, gather those responses, and then send them off to your chatbot. So with this system, you don't need to think about that. You've just posed all the questions. As the responses come in, it immediately, seamlessly passes them to the next step in your pipeline. All you need to do is hit go and wait for it to finish running. So let's quickly look at what a sample output would look like. So in this case, we've input, say, one prompt. How often should I exercise each week? Right, that's our one input. We've produced multiple new challenges, right? In our tone rephraser step. So we can easily track. We can say, okay, now this row, we've rephrased the prompt in the Instagram influencer tone. This is our new challenge. We pass that challenge to our chatbot. We get this response, and then we can pass that response to another chatbot, evaluate it for, in this case, sarcasm, and get a score and a reasoning. So you can imagine the same thing, but maybe your prompts are now Q&A sets, right? The question is okay, what was our revenue in 2024? You could rephrase it in 3 different ways. You can rephrase it like you're an expert, like you're a beginner, right? Like you don't know what you're talking about. And then you can compare the chatbot's responses versus your golden answer and say, okay, does my chatbot respond differently, like less well, if the user phrases their question this way versus that way? Are we getting different tone in our questions if the user poses their response in one way versus the other? So it's very flexible, and I think we're going to talk about some real-world applications of this. But I guess just in terms of this framework, any questions on how to use it, or yes?
Sorry, I haven't been. So how did you come up with that numerical score? Does that come from an LLM? Does that come from a probability?
In this case, we're using an LLM. So this numerical score is just one step in our pipeline, where we're passing in response into an LLM and asking it to, in this case, evaluate a metric and come up with a binary score. So when you're coming up, there's a lot involved with coming up with the evaluators. This one's kind of maybe a bit of a silly example. But when you're actually writing these in practice, you definitely want to calibrate that. Like you need a person looking at this. You need to calibrate it. You're going to need to tweak the prompt a lot, especially if it's ultimately just like a subjective evaluation from an LLM. I mean, there's a lot I could go into here. Like I think the numeric scores generally work. I get concerned when I see numeric scores that are like 1 to 10, because I'm like, okay, what's a 6 versus a 7? Probably meaningless.
Yeah.
But I like binary.
Yeah,
Binary.
a lot of people, I personally feel concerned to rely on numeric score from LLM. I think it's an indicator, but in our case, or in practice, we can replace this function with, for example, a Python function where you compare the result with a label. Compare whether it's the same or not. It could be 0 or 1, or it could be any like classic ML matrix that you defined previously, or you could even call some matrix from DPL, which is another package, including a lot of matrix. Depends on use cases, but like for ARTKIT, you could do it this way, but we provide a framework for you to plug in whatever matrix you want.
It's more of a classification rather than a scoring. Nice.
Yeah, this one's just a classification. One other one I'd like is like when you do have a reference answer, it becomes a little less subjective because you can say here's answer A, here's answer B. You can either ask an LLM, are they hitting the same points? Or you could ask an LLM to say, break those down into the 3 key things, do those match in a binary level? Or we've even done like, okay, let's actually look at the encodings. Like what is this cosine similarity of this response versus that response? Then you're getting a little more to like the statistical hard metrics. And I think ultimately you need like a combination of them.
I know we're talking about sharing some examples, but I think we are running out of time at this point. Yeah. Does anyone have any question before we wrap it up? Thank you all.
Okay. Thank you.